When Dr. Victoria Walsh became Portland's most trusted marriage counselor, couples believed she was saving their relationships. But when her own twisted desires consumed her, she began manipulating her patients into murder, turning therapy sessions into psychological torture chambers that destroyed families and ended lives. Before we get to this wonderful story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the story. The soft afternoon light filtered through the Venetian blinds of Dr. Victoria Walsh's therapy office on the 15th floor of the Pacific Northwest Medical Plaza in downtown Portland, Oregon, casting gentle shadows across the carefully arranged furniture that had been selected to create an atmosphere of safety, trust, and emotional healing. At 48 years old, Dr. Walsh had established herself as one of Oregon's most respected clinical psychologists and marriage counselors, specializing in couples, therapy, and relationship dysfunction for clients struggling with the most complex marital and family issues that traditional therapy had failed to resolve. Dr. Walsh's office was a masterpiece of therapeutic design, featuring earth tone colors chosen specifically for their calming psychological effects on anxious patients, comfortable seating arrangements that promoted open communication between estranged partners, and carefully selected artwork that depicted themes of growth, renewal, and emotional connection. Her degrees from prestigious universities, including Harvard Medical School and Stanford Psychology Department, hung prominently on the walls alongside numerous awards recognizing her contributions to psychological research and her dedication to helping patients overcome their deepest relationship challenges and emotional traumas. Behind her mahogany desk sat an impressive collection of published research papers bearing her name, groundbreaking studies on advanced marriage therapy techniques, psychological manipulation methods, behavioral conditioning protocols, and the complex psychological factors that could drive ordinary couples to commit extraordinary acts of violence against each other. Her colleagues in the mental health community viewed her as a brilliant researcher whose innovative therapeutic approaches were revolutionizing the field of relationship counseling and saving marriages that other therapists had declared beyond repair or hope. But what Dr. Walsh's patients and professional colleagues didn't know was that her therapeutic practice was actually a carefully disguised laboratory where she conducted illegal psychological experiments on vulnerable couples, manipulating their emotions and relationships to satisfy her own twisted research interests and sexual fantasies about controlling human behavior and watching people destroy each other. "Good afternoon, Dr. Walsh," said Marcus Thompson, her 3 o'clock appointment, as he settled into the leather chair across from her desk, alongside his wife Jennifer, who had been attending couples therapy sessions for 6 months following Marcus's devastating discovery of Jennifer's extramarital affair with a co-worker at her marketing firm. The Thompsons had been married for 12 years and had 2 young children, but their relationship had been completely devastated by the betrayal, and they were desperately struggling to rebuild trust, communication, and intimacy. "Good afternoon, Marcus and Jennifer, Doctor," Walsh replied with the warm, professional smile that had made her legendary among both patients. What the Thompsons didn't realize was that Dr. Walsh had been deliberately sabotaging their relationship recovery by providing them with therapeutic advice specifically designed to increase conflict and emotional instability, rather than promote healing, reconciliation, and marital recovery. Dr. Walsh's transformation from legitimate therapist to manipulative predator had begun 5 years earlier, when her own marriage to prominent Portland attorney David Walsh had ended in a bitter public divorce that had exposed her to professional humiliation and devastating financial consequences. David had discovered extensive evidence of Victoria's sexual relationships with several male patients and had threatened to report her unethical behavior to the Oregon Board of Psychology unless she agreed to an expensive divorce settlement that had left her financially devastated and professionally vulnerable. The divorce proceedings had revealed Victoria's disturbing pattern of exploiting vulnerable male patients for sexual gratification, using her position of therapeutic authority to manipulate men who were seeking professional help for serious relationship problems. Her sexual conquests had included married men struggling with marital issues, recently divorced men dealing with emotional trauma, and emotionally vulnerable individuals who had placed complete trust in her professional expertise and therapeutic guidance. Following the divorce, Victoria had been forced to rebuild her practice and reputation while dealing with the psychological trauma of losing her marriage and facing potential professional sanctions from licensing boards. Her response had been to develop increasingly sophisticated methods of psychological manipulation that allowed her to control her patients' behavior while avoiding detection by professional oversight bodies and maintaining the appearance of legitimate therapeutic practice. Victoria's new approach to therapy involved systematically destroying her patients' existing relationships while positioning herself as the only source of emotional support and guidance they could trust, creating complete psychological dependence that served her research interests and sexual desires. Marcus, I can see that you're still struggling with intense feelings of anger and betrayal regarding Jennifer's affair, Dr. Walsh observed, making careful notes in her leather-bound journal that documented not therapeutic progress, but rather the sophisticated psychological conditioning techniques she was implementing to drive the couple toward violence and self-destruction. These feelings are completely natural and justified given the circumstances. Jennifer's actions have fundamentally damaged your ability to trust, and it's important that you don't suppress your legitimate anger about this profound betrayal of your marriage vows. Victoria's therapeutic approach was specifically designed to amplify Marcus's feelings of rage and paranoia while simultaneously increasing Jennifer's guilt and desperation, creating a volatile emotional dynamic that would eventually lead to violence between the spouses. Her ultimate goal was to manipulate Marcus into either killing Jennifer or committing suicide, providing Victoria with detailed case study material for her private research into the psychological factors that could drive people to murder their loved ones. Dr. Walsh, I don't want to be angry all the time, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the emotional exhaustion that had become characteristic of his responses during recent therapy sessions. I love Jennifer, and I want to save our marriage, but I can't stop thinking about her with that other man. The images in my head are driving me crazy, and sometimes I feel like I might do something violent that I'll regret forever. Victoria's response to Marcus's confession of violent thoughts was not to provide therapeutic intervention that would reduce his risk of harmful behavior, but rather to encourage and amplify his dangerous impulses while making him believe that violence might be a justified response to his wife's betrayal. Marcus, your feelings of rage are completely understandable and appropriate given the circumstances, Victoria said with apparent sympathy, while carefully documenting Marcus's psychological state for her research purposes. Jennifer's betrayal has violated the most fundamental trust in your relationship, and your anger is a natural protective response designed to defend your masculine dignity. Sometimes our emotions are telling us important truths about situations that require decisive action to restore balance and justice. Jennifer looked alarmed at Dr. Walsh's validation of Marcus's violent thoughts, having expected their therapist to help reduce tension in their relationship rather than encourage her husband's dangerous impulses toward revenge and retaliation. Dr. Walsh, I'm concerned about the way Marcus has been talking about violence lately. Shouldn't we be working on forgiveness and healing rather than focusing on anger and revenge? I thought therapy was supposed to help us move past the affair, not make things worse. Victoria's response to Jennifer's concerns revealed the true nature of her therapeutic agenda and her complete disregard for her patient's safety and well-being. Jennifer, you need to understand that Marcus's anger is a direct result of your choices and actions. You created this situation through your betrayal, and now you must accept the consequences of your behavior, whatever those consequences might be. Sometimes healing requires justice first. The therapeutic advice that Victoria was providing was specifically designed to increase the likelihood of domestic violence while giving her legal protection through the appearance of legitimate marriage counseling based on established psychological principles. Dr. Walsh, I appreciate that you understand how betrayed I feel, Marcus said, his voice taking on a cold, determined quality that would have alarmed any legitimate therapist concerned about patient safety. But what am I supposed to do with all this rage? Jennifer wants me to just forgive and forget, but I can't stop thinking about making her pay for what she did to our family and our children's future." Victoria's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she recognized the signs that her psychological manipulation was approaching the desired result. Marcus was beginning to express the kind of violent ideation that indicated he might be ready to act on his impulses, providing her with the culmination of months of careful conditioning and emotional manipulation. "Marcus, I think you need to trust your instincts about what justice means in this situation," Victoria said carefully, choosing her words to provide encouragement for violence while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. "Sometimes forgiveness isn't appropriate or healthy when it enables continued betrayal. Sometimes people need to face real consequences for their actions in order to understand the damage they've caused to others." Victoria's manipulation of the Thompson family was part of a larger pattern of psychological abuse that had already resulted in multiple murder-suicides among her former patients. Over the past 3 years, Victoria had successfully manipulated 7 different couples into committing murder-suicide through her therapeutic sessions. Her methods had become increasingly sophisticated as she refined her techniques for identifying vulnerable individuals and exploiting their psychological weaknesses to drive them toward violence. Her first successful manipulation had involved Robert and Susan Chen, a couple struggling with financial problems and infidelity issues. Victoria had convinced Robert that Susan's spending habits and emotional affair were deliberate attempts to destroy him financially and emotionally. After 6 months of therapy, Robert had killed Susan with a kitchen knife before hanging himself in their garage, leaving behind a suicide note that blamed their marital problems for his actions. The second case had involved Michael and Patricia Rodriguez, where Victoria had manipulated Patricia into believing that Michael's drinking problem and verbal abuse would escalate to physical violence against their children. Victoria had provided Patricia with detailed plans for poisoning Michael while making it appear accidental, then had convinced her that suicide was the only way to avoid prison and protect her children's future. Each murder-suicide had been carefully orchestrated to appear as the tragic result of relationship problems rather than deliberate manipulation by their therapist. "Dr. Walsh, there's something else I need to tell you," Jennifer said hesitantly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've been having thoughts about hurting myself because I can't live with the guilt of what I've done to Marcus and our family. Sometimes I think everyone would be better off if I just disappeared." Victoria's response to Jennifer's suicidal ideation was not to provide crisis intervention or safety planning, but rather to encourage these dangerous thoughts while positioning them as a potential solution to the couple's problems. "Jennifer, it's natural that you're feeling overwhelmed by the consequences of your actions. Sometimes when we've caused irreparable damage, we need to consider what would truly be best for everyone involved." Marcus looked shocked at his wife's confession of suicidal thoughts, but Victoria quickly redirected his attention toward anger rather than concern. "Marcus, you can see how Jennifer's guilt is affecting her, but notice that she's still focused on herself and her own feelings rather than the damage she's caused to you and your children. Even her suicidal thoughts are really about avoiding responsibility for her actions." Victoria's simultaneous manipulation of both spouses toward violence and suicide was designed to create a murder-suicide scenario that would eliminate both witnesses to her therapeutic malpractice while providing her with valuable research data. "Dr. Walsh, I feel like we're stuck in a cycle where nothing gets better," Marcus said, his frustration evident in his voice. "Every session seems to make me angrier and Jennifer more depressed. Are we ever going to make progress, or are we just wasting our time and money?" Victoria recognized this question as a crucial moment in her manipulation process, as it indicated that Marcus was becoming desperate enough to consider drastic solutions to his marital problems. "Marcus, progress in therapy sometimes requires making difficult decisions about what you're willing to accept in your life. Some relationships can't be repaired, and sometimes the healthiest choice is to end the situation permanently." The ambiguous language that Victoria used was designed to plant suggestions about murder-suicide while allowing her to claim that she had been discussing divorce if her words were ever scrutinized by investigators or professional review boards. But Victoria's manipulation of the Thompson family was about to be complicated by the unexpected arrival of someone who had been specifically trained to recognize the signs of psychological abuse and therapeutic misconduct. Detective Sarah Martinez of the Portland Police Department's Domestic Violence Unit had been investigating a disturbing pattern of murder-suicides involving couples who had been receiving marriage counseling in the Portland area. Martinez specialized in cases involving domestic violence and had developed expertise in identifying situations where psychological manipulation might be contributing to escalating violence between intimate partners. The detective's investigation had been triggered by reports from several medical examiners who had noticed similarities in the circumstances surrounding domestic violence deaths involving couples who had been in therapy. The pattern suggested that someone with psychological training might be deliberately manipulating vulnerable couples toward violence for unknown motives. Martinez had focused her investigation on Dr. Victoria Walsh after discovering that 8 couples who had committed murder-suicide within the past 3 years had all been receiving therapy from the same psychologist. The statistical likelihood of such a concentration being coincidental was virtually zero, suggesting that Dr. Walsh's therapeutic methods were somehow contributing to the violent outcomes. "Dr. Walsh, I'm Detective Martinez with the Portland Police Department," she announced as she entered the therapy office during what was supposed to be a routine couples session. "I was hoping to speak with you about some domestic violence incidents that have been connected to couples in therapy. Do you have a few minutes to answer some questions?" Victoria's reaction to the detective's unexpected arrival was immediate panic, as she realized that law enforcement was investigating activities that could be directly connected to her manipulation of vulnerable patients. Her therapeutic credentials and reputation in the mental health community had always protected her from scrutiny, but the presence of a police detective asking specific questions about domestic violence suggested that her criminal activities had attracted official attention. "Of course, Detective," Victoria replied, struggling to maintain her professional composure while her mind raced through possible explanations for police interest in her therapeutic practice. "Domestic violence is a serious concern in my field, and I want to make sure I'm providing appropriate support for couples dealing with relationship conflicts and potential safety issues." Marcus and Jennifer Thompson looked at each other with confusion and growing alarm, wondering why a police detective was investigating their therapist and what connection there might be between Dr. Walsh's practice and domestic violence incidents. Their own relationship had become increasingly volatile during therapy, with Marcus's violent thoughts becoming more frequent and intense despite months of supposed professional treatment. Martinez explained that her investigation involved several murder-suicide cases where one spouse had killed the other before taking their own life, with all the perpetrators having been in couples therapy at the time of the violence. "We're particularly interested in therapeutic approaches that might inadvertently increase conflict between spouses rather than reducing it, or methods that might encourage violence as a solution to relationship problems." The detective's description of her investigation was focused on exactly the type of psychological manipulation that Victoria had been engaging in, creating an immediate threat that would require her to eliminate both the detective and her current patients to protect her criminal research. "Detective Martinez, I can assure you that my therapeutic methods are based on established psychological principles and are designed to help couples resolve their conflicts peacefully," Victoria said, her anxiety increasing as she realized that the police investigation had progressed far enough to involve direct questioning of therapists. "Every intervention I use is intended to promote healing and prevent violence through improved communication and emotional understanding." Marcus Thompson interrupted the conversation with information that would prove extremely dangerous for both him and Jennifer. "Detective Martinez, actually, we've been having more problems since we started therapy with Dr. Walsh. My anger has gotten worse, and she's been telling me that my violent thoughts are justified and natural. I'm starting to worry that I might actually hurt Jennifer, and she's been talking about suicide." The patient's revelation confirmed Martinez's suspicions about Dr. Walsh's therapeutic methods and placed the entire Thompson family in immediate danger from Victoria, who now realized that her psychological manipulation was about to be completely exposed by the combination of the police investigation and her patient's testimony about her unethical treatment approaches. Victoria's response was swift and calculated as she moved to eliminate all three threats to her criminal research using the psychological manipulation techniques that had driven her previous victims to murder. Detective Martinez, I think there may be some misunderstandings about the normal process of working through relationship trauma, Victoria said calmly, while mentally developing a plan for manipulating Marcus into killing both his wife and the detective before taking his own life. Perhaps we could continue this discussion in my consultation room, where we can review specific therapeutic protocols without compromising patient confidentiality or creating additional stress for my patients. Martinez agreed to move their discussion to the private consultation room, unaware that Victoria was leading them into an isolated location where she could attempt to psychologically manipulate Marcus into committing murder. The detective's training had taught her to be cautious during investigations, but she had no reason to suspect that a licensed psychologist would attempt to incite violence during a routine inquiry. As they moved toward the consultation room, Victoria began implementing the psychological conditioning techniques she had perfected over years of manipulating vulnerable patients. Marcus, I can see that this police investigation is causing you additional stress at a time when you're already dealing with Jennifer's betrayal. Sometimes external pressures can clarify what we really need to do to protect ourselves and our families from further harm. The consultation room was soundproof and private, providing Victoria with the perfect environment for conducting the psychological manipulation that would drive Marcus to commit multiple murders. Marcus, I want you to consider something very carefully, Victoria said as she closed the door behind them, isolating the group from any potential witnesses to her manipulation. Detective Martinez's investigation suggests that you and Jennifer are being viewed as potential threats to public safety, people who might become violent. This kind of scrutiny could destroy your life and take away your children, even if you've done nothing wrong. The psychological manipulation that Victoria was implementing involved convincing Marcus that he was facing imminent threats from multiple sources that could only be eliminated through violence. Her technique was based on extensive research into the psychological factors that could trigger homicidal behavior in individuals who were already emotionally unstable and prone to violent thoughts. Dr. Walsh, what are you suggesting? Marcus asked, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and growing rage as Victoria's manipulation began to take effect. Are you saying that Detective Martinez is here to arrest me? That Jennifer is cooperating with the police against me? That they're trying to take away my children? Victoria's response was carefully calculated to amplify Marcus's paranoia and direct his violent impulses toward both Jennifer and Detective Martinez. Marcus, I'm saying that you need to protect yourself and your family from people who want to destroy everything you've worked to build. Sometimes protection requires decisive action that others might not understand. But Victoria's psychological manipulation was about to be interrupted by Detective Martinez's recognition of the dangerous situation she had been led into. Martinez's extensive training in domestic violence cases had taught her to recognize the signs of psychological manipulation and incitement to violence. Victoria's words and behavior were clearly designed to encourage Marcus to commit violent acts, and the detective realized that she was witnessing a deliberate attempt to trigger a murder-suicide incident. Dr. Walsh, step away from Mr. Thompson immediately, Martinez commanded as she drew her service weapon and called for backup assistance. You're under arrest for incitement to violence and psychological abuse of patients. The confrontation that followed would expose Victoria's elaborate manipulation scheme and reveal the full extent of her systematic destruction of vulnerable couples through psychological torture disguised as therapy. Victoria attempted to maintain her manipulation of Marcus even as she was being arrested, continuing to whisper suggestions about violence and revenge until Martinez physically separated her from her patient. Marcus, don't let them destroy your family. You know what you need to do to protect what's yours. The investigation that followed Victoria's arrest revealed the full scope of her criminal activities and the sophisticated methods she had used to drive couples to murder-suicide. Forensic analysis of Victoria's therapy notes and patient files revealed detailed documentation of her psychological manipulation techniques, including step-by-step plans for driving specific patients toward violence. Her research materials included extensive studies on the psychological factors that could trigger homicidal and suicidal behavior, along with detailed case studies of her successful manipulations. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Victoria had been selling her research data to criminal organizations interested in psychological manipulation techniques, generating substantial profits from her systematic destruction of vulnerable families. Victoria Walsh was ultimately arrested and charged with multiple counts of psychological abuse, incitement to violence, conspiracy to commit murder, and practicing psychology without regard for patient safety and welfare. The investigation revealed that Victoria had systematically manipulated at least 12 couples into committing murder-suicide through her therapeutic sessions, using sophisticated psychological conditioning techniques to drive emotionally vulnerable individuals to violence. Her detailed research notes provided evidence of her deliberate intent to cause harm and her complete disregard for professional ethics and patient safety. Marcus and Jennifer Thompson required extensive therapy with legitimate mental health professionals to overcome the psychological damage that Victoria had inflicted through her manipulation. Their marriage ultimately survived, but only after months of genuine therapeutic intervention designed to heal rather than harm their relationship. Victoria's conviction resulted in the revocation of her psychology license and prompted comprehensive reforms in therapeutic oversight procedures designed to protect vulnerable patients from exploitation by unethical mental health professionals. The therapist, who had promised to heal relationships, had instead used her expertise to destroy families and end lives, but her crimes had been exposed and her victims had found justice through the dedication of investigators who refused to ignore the signs of systematic psychological abuse. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.